take this book and now you can give it to your boss. One of my friends kept joking he was going to bonk people over the head with it because it's like thick, full of citations. So many stories about developers that treat them as completely isolated individual brains. In the book, I actually have a name for this. I call this the brains in jars model of developers. Culture is infrastructure. It is not just a nice to have. It shapes our thinking. It shapes our problem solving. It directly changes the quality of work that we do, which is called More Bands, Fewer Rock Stars. There is such a deep cultural social belief that all of our technology advances come from individual geniuses.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ilya. Today is our 5th episode of JetBrains Research Podcast, and I'm happy to talk to a person who I can call colleague because I believe we share a lot in what we are interested in our research. This is Dr. Cat Hicks. She's an author of a brand new book, Psychology of Software Teams. We will talk about that definitely in a little bit. She's also a chief scientist and founder in Catharsis, evidence science consultancy, which is for engineering teams, which is by itself is very interesting to encounter. So, Kat, can you maybe talk a little bit about yourself? How you introduce yourself to people who doesn't know you?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's delightful to be here. Yeah, I do introduce myself as a psychologist, and I started saying this thing really to my friends, and then it kind of stuck in work too. I started saying I'm a psychologist for the humans in technology. And so all kinds of questions about teams and how high performers in tech stay motivated and how our minds work, and even, sort of what we can expect or do to understand good problem solving with AI, all of these kinds of things. As you know, but maybe our audience doesn't always know, these are topics that psychology has been really, really interested in. And more broadly, like the social and behavioral sciences have been really, really interested in. So I started as a psychologist and did an empirical quantitative PhD in psychology. And I studied performance and disclosure. And when I was doing that, I got really, really interested in how it works in the real world. And so I have just built a career around trying to help teams in the real world, putting out open science that I think helps them, and really in working in dialogue with software teams and software developers and the community and technology themselves, kind of creating these interesting, unusual, some people might call it weird, science for developers. And so I've had kind of like the honor and joy and privilege of running some studies in partnership with this technical community. A lot of that is in the book. It also fuels my consulting because I get to work with engineering organizations on topics that are near and dear to my heart, like how is it that our software team does it have a learning culture? What are the messages that our managers are sending to this team about whether they can invest in long-term maintenance? Can we change that if it's going wrong? So all kinds of questions that I think come up all the time in engineers' daily life are questions that psychology and psychology methods can help with. So that's what I do there.
Maybe it's even more important today when things are changing. For me, it's
I think so.
Yeah, when I see how the world is changing today, I really learned once again stuff that I didn't think would be that important. I don't know. 20 years ago. Can I start from the big question? You've just written the book. And the question that I have for today, for this very fast changing pace of research, why the book? Why is this big form? So what motivated you to put this into one big knowledge piece?
It's a great question, and a question that everyone should ask themselves before writing a book is that you should know, because there's many, many beautiful ways of putting out work in the world. And I've done a lot of them. I mean, I gave a talk that I put up in my GitHub repo. I make TikToks. Like, there's a lot of ways to communicate science and a lot of places you can go find people. I love public speaking. I'm lucky to go give talks at tech conferences. So it wasn't that I had a desire to I was already getting to share my work. But I realized that I wanted something that people could take home with them. It's really easy to go and you listen to a great keynote or you hear some researcher and you think, great, I want to go apply it. But there's only so much room that those other formats give you, and what you really want is for someone to feel supported in their daily life. And they're going to go home and they're going to have a very scary thing that they have to do, like go talk to their manager, or, hey, even leaders, they have to go talk to a board or talk to, get opinions around software developers changed inside of their own company. So to me, a book was just a really, really nice way to have the space and the time and kind of the empathy to do that. In a science project, as of course, when you write a paper, it's very, very conventional and it's very locked down and there's a certain way you have to write it. And we do that for really good reasons. We do that because we want it to feel like people get to assess the evidence themselves. You don't want to put too much of your own opinion in there if you can't justify it. But it's different in a book because you get to be kind of a whole person. And so I felt that there was a kind of conversation I wanted to have in the technical space that was a little bit more big and human and was a little bit more like, I'm now going to tell you a whole story about an engineer that I know who was struggling to stay motivated. And then I'm also going to tell you about the psychology theory around how our motivation works as a system. And there's room for all of that in this one chapter, and you can read it before you go to bed, And, I think all of those things made a book really, really compelling. Besides that, I knew that in order for psychology for software teams to feel like a real thing, a thing that people would take seriously, some people were only going to encounter that in a book, or once they saw the title or saw that this was a real thing. There's a kind of power in having something in a book and having a title, and it's like a real thing now. And I would joke with some of my friends, take this book and now you can give it to your boss, or you can kind of, one of my friends kept joking he was going to bonk people over the head with it because it's thick, full of citations. I think that just speaks to the cultural power that books have. It makes things more real when they are in a book. And that I thought could help people win some of these battles they have to fight about being seen as whole people.
So do you have at least one copy for every meeting you are attending right now?
I'm waiting on my copies to arrive in the mail, actually, which is so funny because lots and lots of other people are getting their copies early. And so I'm just being sent many, many pictures of people's books. And then I don't have one. But that would be my suggestion. You could wear it, like a bulletproof vest as well if you need to.
I wonder what is the feeling of holding your own big book. I mean, this should be really wonderful. I hope that will happen soon to you.
Thank you. That is such a rewarding part of it. Yeah.
So you said about conventional science, and I do agree. Science is a set of rules basically that we follow. But your career path and your origin story is far from being conventional, and your position right now is also far from being conventional. You are a scientific consultant. You are not in academy or industry. You are independent, and you are navigating in this world where you are allowed to do things that are not so conventional. How do you find yourself between these different parts of world, conventional, slow, not really keeping up the pace science, and this world of technical innovation, this world of fast changes that are due to AI and all of that stuff? How do you feel about it?
Ilya, this is such a great question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me this question before, and I really enjoy it. I think it's hard for anybody to explain how they got to where they are because life is so complicated and it's full of so many choices. But when I look back, I do think I have always been a person who's in the middle of multiple worlds. And I think the reason for that is I've always gravitated towards other people who are also struggling with like pushing the boundary forward of their field. And the thing about that is that you need fuel or help or insight that comes from like just a little bit outside of your world. I really think that human innovation comes from social communities and from people working together. And I had kind of this vision that there were so many interesting people in technology. When I first got out of academia, I had started working in a tech company in an analytics data science kind of role. And I had definitely had some really interesting research opportunities with that. Like I did a research project. I was at Google as a researcher for a while. And so I saw some impressive large scale research projects inside of companies. And I saw that they could really change people's lives, like thousands of people's lives could be helped, if you improved something for managers there or, policies there, which I worked on. I actually worked on learning programs for employees. But there was just this part of me that had this other idea that was so strange and ambitious. And it was that there is a kind of developer science we could do in the world if there was a third place it could exist, And you can see this happen in other industries, actually. So there are interesting research centers for health research. There are interesting crossovers between industry and academia in other fields. My partner is a neuroscientist, and so I see a lot of the interesting kind of crossover that happens between industry and academia there. Of course, with AI, I have a lot of friends who did like computational biology or, some sort of machine learning there, and then crossed over into industry and then come back into traditional science and sometimes, spend a summer doing a residency where they do. So in my mind, I think I just had this feeling that there is a lot these two worlds can learn from each other, but there isn't a place for developers to like have that conversation. And so I founded the Developer Success Lab, which was this research lab that I ran for 3 years at Pluralsight. And when I pitched Pluralsight on this idea, I said to them, basically, this is this incredible group of people, the developers, or just in general, it's bigger than just software right now, right? Because of AI, and I think it will continue to be much bigger. People solving technical problems, they deserve to have some attention on them. They deserve to have some research projects that go beyond an individual company, but they also need researchers who are like out there in the world with them. And so it's not academia in that it's very removed from the jobs that you actually have. And it's not always like in concert, doesn't always have that empathy. I mean, much love to my like academic friends, but I have always been very frustrated by the pace of academia, in part because I care about a kind of research that I describe in the book called participatory action research or community-based research. And in that model, you try to work really, really closely with the group of people who are in your research. And you try to have both a science part of it, but also a part that is immediately helpful for people, even for the people like inside of your study. So we tried to do that in the Dev Success Lab, which I think was really successful. And now I'm doing it with Catharsis, which is really, really interesting because you can take amazing things from academia. Like if they test a measure or they come up with a theory that I think is really, really useful for software teams, then with Catharsis, I could be a translator of that and bring that to teams. But at the same time, it gives me the opportunity to work really closely with, these teams in the real world, or to also just do strange projects that wouldn't happen otherwise. Like I wrote a skill that really got popular with a group of engineers about learning with AI. It's called Learning Opportunities. And I wrote this because I was a learning scientist, right? And I was thinking, that's my early training. And I was thinking like, folks need a little bit of help in how they're using AI, in understanding how to teach themselves and how to learn. And I did not at all expect it to get as popular as it got. But then because that happened and I was kind of independent, I went and did an interview project with people using this skill. So I was able to just follow my curiosity and do something really interesting there. So I guess that was a really long answer, but this is a beautiful place to be for me. It's also been difficult because you have to like explain it to everybody all the time. But I've always been someone who's just wanted to be in this place exactly where I can kind of have the best of all of these worlds. Yeah.
No, I really agree with you, and I can relate to so much of what you have said. I mean, starting from explaining this is challenging, but also for me, it's the thing that gives me so much when I have to explain an external person what we're doing. It really helps me focus and really helps me understand sometimes what we're actually doing. So yes, I can really relate to that. And also the pace. Definitely the pace in academia can be disappointing sometimes. I've just recently had a paper published that I helped collect data in 2017, I believe, or something like that. So yeah, it can be disappointing.
Good for you for continuing to publish work that is from back then. I know how much that takes. Yeah.
No, here it was my colleagues. So I actually was really surprised to get some email that the paper has been published. I honestly forgot about it.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Yeah. But we need to talk about publishing at some point in this podcast because it is so difficult to get psychology or social science work published around software teams. And I think that's something that like not a lot of people understand. That's something that I hope that my work will eventually help change. But it is really interesting. I have this conversation with a lot of researchers in our space that sometimes we do very, very interesting projects that we think practitioners want to hear about and would really, be helped by or find really interesting. And then there's just nowhere to put it. There's no like journal that's specifically for social science for these folks. There's no like understanding of our methods. So that piece is something that continues to be difficult.
We can talk about
another reason to write a book.
This is definitely an important part of this conversation because for me the question might be even bigger, and it is related with your independent role. Why publish at all right now? Why do we need to publish in some academia venue, which is by design is quite slow, and like a lot of fascinating stuff is being published just in blogs, especially in tech. So people are communicating there and they share ideas, they criticize each other. They basically maybe not so conventional, not so regular way, but doing the same thing as publishing in academia was thought to be doing. And you are still publishing different kinds of things. You have your blog, you publish a lot in social medias, you publish scientific papers, and you have published a book. What is these different things that motivate you for these different formats?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I definitely understand and agree that the conversation in technical communities and the influence that happens there and the real out loud problem solving is not happening in academic journals. It is happening with the real working people. And, in academia, sometimes we call that the gray literature. I don't know if you've heard that term. But I always think that's an interesting term because it kind of says actually what is happening that's outside of academic journals and outside of conventional scientific publishing is itself like a very impressive form of practice and has theories and has hypotheses and has kind of these things. They're a little bit messier, but they definitely emerge. That's actually something that I was really interested in trying to integrate into my book. I talk about some of the theories that I think are out there in software engineering and on these teams, even if people don't always call it that. And some of them I agree with and some of them I don't agree with because some of them I think are kind of stereotypes and things like that. But to answer your actual question, I think there are different goals for these different kinds of publishing. And I almost feel like I have a responsibility, as not a lot of people get into PhD programs. I feel very lucky to have had that chance. I grew up as a very poor kid. I didn't know anything about academia. I got into grad school by the skin of my teeth. I mean, I was really good in school actually, but I came from a very unknown school that didn't have labs, so the whole thing was like an uphill battle. And once you get there, people treat you differently and you have access to this world. And so there is still something very powerful about having a piece of evidence in the scientific record. And you actually see that matter in the world of AI. Like if models and agents are going to be consuming information in the world and they apply like a hierarchy of sources and they say, oh, I'm going to apply some rule about the quality of evidence, what goes at the top? It's academic publication, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you just start to think about the pieces of our world that don't make it into those venues. And what can we do to make better pieces enter those venues? It's not all about AI, but AI is just a really good example of how certain narratives and pieces of evidence you want to give them everything you've got, to get them out there. And so I think it's kind of like, I have a duty of care. I have like a responsibility. If these people in technology are trusting me with their data, if they are trusting me to be a psychologist working on behalf of them, I can't always do it. I can't always afford to publish a scientific article, but I can always try to get their work out there. And some people will only listen to a study when it's published. And I've encountered this over and over and over again. When we did our code review anxiety project, we really knew we wanted that to be an empirical publication that was peer reviewed, because it is a topic that people just dismiss and don't take seriously. And so that was like a really nice contribution to be able to make. Now, I don't think everybody needs to do it. I don't think every project needs to do it. There's not room for it in the world for everything to go that way. But that's a reason that I try to stay committed to doing the scientific publishing when I can. But it's hard. Your thoughts?
That's fascinating perspective. I mean, starting from these different levels of evidence for AI, I have never thought of it like that, actually. And it's really nice to hear. And also duty of care. I mean, that's true. We have gotten so many things from the society. Being able to do research, it's only honest to give something back. I really agree with that.
I will say for you as for individuals too, I think when you're a researcher in tech, it's really easy to do work that never makes it outside of the company. And that's just hard for individual researchers in our careers. And so scientific publishing, in a way, it's like our version of, getting to launch a product that people know about and that's out there, because it is something that like you can't take, nobody can take it back. Nobody can take it away from you. So there's a defensive move too, which is like, hey, if you can publish something, then it's the publication of record. It has this like enduring quality to it. Yeah.
Also, one thing that I think a lot about is how important it is to share all this data when we can do that. Given how much data is being generated in tech industry and how less of this data actually has gotten into universities, into psychology programs, so many stuff about human behavior that we can actually learn inside companies. So yes,
it absolutely goes the other way. And I love that, because that's actually been kind of a frustration, but also like a motivation of mine for the last 5 years or so, has really been noticing there is so much happening in the world of technology. I don't know how you feel about this. I can't believe people will tell me you're the only psychologist for people in tech. I know that's not true, because I'm like, look, there are people at JetBrains, right? But the fact that people say that, it's just a big, I will say bluntly, I think it's a failure on the part of the social sciences to not go into these applied occupations and go into these worlds and try to study what people are doing that's so interesting, and there's so many, I came from learning science. There's so many interesting questions about how people problem solve and how our cognition works. That is, you can see it happening in code, like code almost like shows you how people are thinking. And psychologists have just traditionally not been part of that or very interested in that. So
I believe we have the opportunity right now to reinvent ourselves as applied scientists.
Tell me more.
No, I definitely believe that this is a repetition of what has actually been happening before, like in 70s and 80s, when the whole world of new interfaces was coming around. There were a lot of people that were responsible from psychology as well in shaping this world. And right now it seems that we're once again in the stage where everything is changing and our expertise is becoming more important.
Yeah. Oh, I love that historical framing. I don't think I had quite put it that way, but you're right. Now I think it's really silly that I had not thought of that in my own mind exactly that way, because when I did my postdoc, I worked with Don Norman in the design lab at UC San Diego, right? And Jim Holland, like some of these, and, people who had been very influential in the cognitive science and HCI and early design world. And there was so much interest in the human mind back there. And it feels like we lost that somewhere along the way. Like, I don't know exactly what happens in technology, but I agree, because especially in working with AI it's not just about helping people face change, although there's a part of that too, but it's actually about understanding what our minds really need and how we should design new technology. I've been talking to several of my really good friends and doing this interview project around the skills that I've written and things like that. And it's been very, very interesting to be a psychologist and to feel like everything that I learned from this field is suddenly like really causal in whether or not you get a good or bad outcome from AI. If you have like a good mental model about your own mind, you can figure out how you should be using these tools better. Yeah. I'm finding that very
we'll definitely talk about metacognition a little bit later. But can we circle back to the book? And I would start my question about the book itself directly from the title. So we have written a book about psychology of teams, software teams. The most often thing, as I see it right now, is to talk about developers' productivity, developer experience, a lot of stuff about developers, but not about teams. And for you, the main object is the team. Why do you think it's the most important thing? Is it the most important thing to talk about the teams rather than individuals? Can you talk a little bit about this difference?
Yeah. If you're going to start with the title, I'm going to start with the cover. If you look at the cover of the book, I can't believe I don't have a copy to hold up right now, but if you look at the cover of the book,
the link.
Yeah. So you've probably seen a lot of psychology books, and on the cover of every psychology book is usually a brain. Maybe there's like a brain and a gear, there's a head, right? It's very, very individual. And I am a psychologist of environments. I am a psychologist who always has tried to study the forces around us that are shaping all of us, and individuals actually do really matter in that. So I wouldn't say that this is a book that is not about, there are parts of it that are about individuals, but it is a very environments focused book. And so on the book's cover, when folks get it, they'll see I put up all of these pictures of mountains that are from my own hikes. And they're all pictures that I took. And that's because I wanted the book to represent the idea that we're all inside of environments and ecosystems all of the time. So many stories about developers that treat them as completely isolated individual brains. And in the book, I actually have a name for this. I call this the brains in jars model of developers. and I talk throughout the book about, what does a brains in jars organization look like? What does a brains in jars company, believe? And why is that so painful for us? So the reason that I actually took a team's approach is very, very principled. It's because those are the approaches that over and over again in my research and other people's research have helped people get better outcomes. And so things like seeing yourself as part of a collective in psychology, in development, where everybody is problem solving together, or believing that we have to solve some of our problems on the team level instead of on the individual level, it's actually pragmatically just incredibly helpful for people. When I incorporate those measures into my research, they're very predictive. So you can predict enormous amounts of the variance and how productive people feel like they can be on the individual level once you fix those team levers. So for those reasons, I wanted to emphasize teams. There are other books from way back, decades and decades ago in this space that talk about, for instance, there's The Psychology of Computer Programming by Gerald Weinberg, which is, I thought it was a nice play on, it was a different generation and a different book, to say we're going to be talking about teams now, like really explicitly.
What are the most important things that you see that are happening on the team level, but not on individual level? So what changes when you are talking about environment? And for me, this is just honey to my ears to hear about environment. And although in my career I was studying brains for quite a lot of time, my upbringing is from cultural psychology, where the main thing about shaping our individuality is culture, so environment in a sense. So what is these new things that are happening on the team level?
I see why we're getting along so well. So, I believe that, individuals are always interpreting what is possible for them in light of what they think their group around them wants. And our identities are deeply shaped by our groups. So I have a chapter in the book called Conflict or Coalitions, and it gets very, very real about the us versus them groups that can form in the workplace. So I think one of the huge things we take from the group level, and rather than our own individual level, is our expectation of, how are the people around me going to behave? Are these people going to cruel to me if I make a mistake in a code review? Are these people going to expect me to be a cold person because I'm technical? Are they going to understand if I have a disagreement? Like all of these kind of negotiations and expectations that we're kind of navigating about our environment, we feed into these with our team norms and our team practices and the messages that are happening on those levels. And so the individuals also feed back. Like I'm a very multi-systems psychologist, hey, you can go deep into your own mind, you can go deep into your own cognition, but I'm also a social constructivist. So for, listeners who aren't you, I believe that our identities are deeply, deeply shaped by the groups that we feel part of. And we are always seeing our own reality through that kind of lens. So a good example of this is, I did this research project on how developers were thinking about AI and how AI was introducing threat to them or making them feel like this identity threat. We've seen a number of big pieces about this. I know Annie Vila wrote a really interesting blog post about this that went kind of viral. I don't know if you've seen it, about the software identity crisis. Yeah. And so when I saw this as a psychologist, I thought, oh my gosh, it's it's identity threat. And identity threat is an experience that we have when we feel like, something about me is going to be rejected. Something about who I am might be rejected by this environment, by these people. And so you can actually measure this. And I have do it in my consulting, even with engineering orgs. And you find that if you can reduce people's AI identity threat, if you can give them more signals and reasons to believe that their team environment is going to let them learn, that they are going to be seen as a good engineer, even without changing the individuals at all, you just change the team stuff, you cut that AI skill threat that we see in half. You just totally take a huge amount of it out for people. So it's really, really incredible to look at a software environment and say, where are the really biggest levers that we have to create change? I think a huge amount of them are at the team level. And also, to me, there's this thing for leaders, which is, there are lots of things that matter for individuals, but you can't directly change them. Like you can't just look at someone and say, well, go change yourself, to one individual person. And I think that that is an important line to draw. Like leaders have a responsibility to change cultural things, to change organizational things, to change environmental things. They do not usually have the right to go demand that an individual change, their individual motivation. So there's a piece of the book that is more for individuals, and there's some pieces of the book that are more talk about what's good for leaders to do and what's good for organizations to do. And so another reason to learn about the team side is because that's actually what we have access to in our workplaces and can change.
That's fascinating. That's really great to hear, because right now, most of the conversations that I hear, they're about cognitive part of what's happening. And the biggest threat is de-skilling, cognitive offloading, meaning that for those who don't know these terms.
I think it's really...
No, please continue.
That's become the popular argument. And I will say, I think it's really cherry picking what's happening. And it's not that there's not truth to it. There is, but it's so tempting. We just like to put the word cognitive in front of something. And then we're like, oh no, there's this cognitive offloading happening. But if all you're ever looking at is the individual person and their individual task, you miss so many reasons these things are happening and so many differences between them. And, one moment of offloading is also a moment when you pair program, you also offload, you also hand parts of the problem to other people. So in order to actually just describe what's really happening, I think we need to go bigger than the individual level. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you because I'm very passionate about that one in particular.
And also offloading has been happening throughout the history all the time. I mean, the first time people were afraid of cognitive offloading was probably the invention of publishing itself in 14th, 13th century. People were afraid that the memory would become weaker, and it did. And indeed, people were not able to remember things in those details with books. So I really believe that this cultural and organizational and motivational level is the thing that, I don't know, helps to have it together. This is we do things for some reason, not it's not just a passive cognitive process. So we really
do things for a reason. Sorry, again, interrupt you. I come from a family with a lot of brothers, and we all interrupt each other.
No, I believe this is just where at least I feel that we're so in sync that it's important to share this emotion that is happening right now. Can I ask about another thing? So definitely on the same page about team stuff, cultural stuff, group stuff that needs to be changed. You also talk a lot about myths that people have in their, not only in the book, but in your social presence. What are the most important things that you feel that people misunderstand in thinking about psychology of software individuals?
There's a lot. I'll start with one of my biggest ones, which I tackle it takes up actually a fairly substantial portion of the third chapter of my book, which is called More Bands, Fewer Rock Stars. And there is such a deep cultural social belief that all of our technology advances come from individual geniuses. And this varies a bit across culture. I mean, it's interesting talking to, a non-American, about this, because obviously there are parts of tech that are highly influenced by Silicon Valley. And so there are different parts of the world, Europe thinks about this a little bit differently. Nevertheless, all over the world, and psychologists have measured this across many, many countries, we have these stereotypes that engineering work in particular, and these types of problem solving is different than other kinds of problem solving, and that you can only be good at it if you're born good at it. And it's kind of an example of fixed mindset, if you've heard about this idea of fixed mindset. So different people believe this more strongly or not. I think it's really interesting in tech because I always think of our beliefs as something that sometimes they come to the forefront of our mind. They're activated. So anything that I'm describing that's a stereotype, I never think that this is what somebody thinks all the time. That's never like my argument. I always think we're all very complicated. We're all kind of see things from multiple perspectives. But a stereotype to me is something that just like often gets activated, often gets, out in front of our thinking and sort of filters what we see. And so in the book, I talk about the lone genius stereotype as this idea that really how we should design for software work, we should always be thinking the most important people are these geniuses. They're probably going to like match certain stereotypes about, gender and race and other demographics, right? And we should build our whole teams around these people and they should be kind of like worshipped. This is kind of the extreme version of the stereotype. But the moment I started to describe this, I mean, people would come up to me after every time I would give a talk and just say, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think what's really interesting is if you look at the research data and you look at the evidence, there is so much evidence that amazing technology breakthroughs come from large groups, that they come from highly collaborative cultures, that they come from other parts of software development that value sharing solutions. You think about open source problem solving and being very generous across people with like sharing solutions and creating entry points for other people to problem solve. That is an example of a culture that sees problem solving as like very, very collaborative and social, actually. So I think that the stereotype is kind of in tension with what's like really happening in software. But so many people believe in it. I mean, there are these early books in software where we're trying to even figure out what computer programming is and who could be good at it. And they take these like very small laboratory studies. And this is actually, to me, an example of a failure of science for developers, because there were these early laboratory studies that just said, oh, sit down, we're going to take 5 guys who are our 5 friends, sit down, solve a programming problem, and whoever solves it faster, that's proof of an individual difference here. And I'm really curious what you think about this, because I know you have some individual difference perspective. And they never really like tested that idea again. And it just made its way into like many, many books and many perspectives in this field. And then my colleagues and I took a look at this in this large scale paper where we looked at like a year of people's programming work across 216 different companies. This is a study we did called No Silver Bullets. And in our work, we found, probably not a shock to any of our practitioners, we found that software work is highly variable. Like the same person who is really fast on one task might be really slow on another task. And it's not that there aren't individual differences like in skill and ability and things like that, but the things that really drive our outcomes in these software environments are just not these fixed individual differences as far as we see in the evidence. I mean, I think that it really is these environmental factors that are much more predictive about how software work gets done. So I think that was a little bit of a wonky answer to you.
No, it's interesting.
The lone genius thing is one of those myths that I'm just always trying to take a hammer to.
I do agree that this part is overvalue the role of one person, especially in big projects and big in situations where you need to have some stable solution that needs to be shared. And for example, we were talking about code review before, and for a lot of practitioners, developers, it is seen as a thing that is basically about checking the quality of the code that has been presented. But there's a lot of good research that has shown that actually this is much more about sharing the common understanding of what's happening. That is important for the long-term stability of any project, basically. So
yes. What's really interesting, because I did this several studies on code review anxiety and the avoidance of code reviews, and so which is a reason to care about it. By the way, like sometimes people think, oh, this anxiety sounds really like touchy-feely, but if you have an environment that creates a lot of anxiety around code reviews for people, you will spike the avoidance of technical tasks. So people will avoid like 40% more of their technical tasks or something like that in our research. It just really, really is a blocker for people if they feel like they're not going to have a good experience in code reviews. One of the things that's interesting about that was we really found that if you started to remind people to think a little bit more broadly about what is the point of a code review, and it's not actually just about whether you're a good or a bad coder, which a lot of people get locked into like the fear of the evaluation, very understandably. But if that's all you see it as, then you will just be locked in threat. Again, you will be really afraid that it's just a moment for your team to reject you. But another way of seeing it is this is a big learning opportunity for the team. This is a way I'm going to actually learn some skills. This is a way that I'm going to help my, colleague over here. And teams that are able to like tap into that version of it and see code review not as like, oh, I'm like, gatekeeping you and I'm like trying to be really critical of you. If you can actually see it like a learning exercise and an important part of your skill building, I mean, everything about it improves. Like, first of all, you actually do vet the quality better because you're not like hung up on your performance anxiety. Second of all, even people who have trouble doing it for themselves, they can activate that compassion for other people. And so they'll like engage more in the reviews. So it was a really interesting connection to find. And in general, I find that developers care a lot more about their colleagues than people think. Like that's another stereotype, is that they are like cold people who don't care, about their colleagues. And to me, that's not the case at all. This is like a very compassionate group of people that we just don't always give them like the routes to express that compassion.
Because we test them as individuals to see who is better so many times in their life. So they're used to this being the best in this skill or in this thing. I believe this is the environment that can be changed.
I think so.
In my personal experience, this is the best part of science. It's not always like this, but in science, we talk much more about our work as just another brick in the understanding of the whole picture, and the review process is the process that helps you to think about something from different direction. Of course, it's not always like that. I mean, it's an ideal picture, but I would love.
I agree. I agree.
Super. That this is like I really feel so many clicking in this discussion. Can I ask another complicated question, of course, but still the one that we cannot avoid? How all of that is changing in the AI world? So what are the main effects that you experience as a practitioner of AI? And you've touched this a little bit, but from this perspective, what AI brings to the table?
I think that it would be very silly of me to sit here and act like I knew everything about AI. There's kind of this scramble right now that everybody is doing to sort of say, oh, my thing really always matters. I will tell you what I am observing, and I'm still forming my opinion about it. And I think that it is changing all the time. So I have sympathy with everybody out there who feels like every month it's something different. When a big change comes into an environment, we have this level of uncertainty just about how we are supposed to act and how our colleagues are going to expect us to act. And something about uncertainty is that our minds hate it. I mean, we just hate feeling this level of uncertainty. And so we go into all kinds of behaviors when we feel uncertainty. Like, I don't know if you know the concept in psychology of belonging uncertainty. So if you feel like uncertain about whether you truly belong to your community, to your team, to your org, to your professional field, it is just viscerally uncomfortable for us. So I have studied belonging in my research, and I do see a heightened threat, to belonging. Like people feel really afraid that they're not going to be seen as full developers, that the things that made them successful before are not going to continue to make them successful now. That is hard and painful. But I think that there are a lot of different choices you can make in that kind of moment. And so when I see developers really able to move forward and protect themselves and do well in this time and start to problem solve with AI, I see people start to ask questions like, what is the version of the stuff that I cared about before for this new AI era? So like if you're someone who really cares about quality, you might be starting to think, well, what are the various different new ways that I can enforce quality with these tools? And it's very interesting because there's kind of like the surface conversation about AI, but then there's the deeper conversation. There's the reality of people's actions with AI, and those don't always match up. So when I work with engineering orgs on this, I will often encourage them, and I've run this for people. I've run inventories where we say, let's actually get people to break apart what we mean when we say AI and when we say we're using AI, and let's break it into different tasks. And I know, of course, you all have done this as well in your research. And what is fascinating is how many times people are actually using AI in a lot of different ways that they didn't think that their colleagues were using. So a good example of this is I almost always find that people are actually trying to use AI to learn about an old part of their code base, or trying to use it to like ramp up in, something that they've always been putting off, or do like maintenance tasks that have been, put off for a long time. And that's a very, very different story than saying, oh, people are only using AI just to grind out lots and lots and lots of new code, right? And so I think once we can actually have that openness of a conversation, then all of this same psychology stuff that we're talking about, really does become a roadmap. Like, how can we try to be compassionate to each other? How can we be authentic and real about what we're really doing? I have a chapter in the book called Becoming an Organization That Wants to Understand Itself. And it's about trying to measure things that we're doing and then trying to like hold ourselves accountable to whether that thing really worked. So even if you're a very anti-AI developer, and you're trying to navigate a world with people who are very pro-AI, I think there's some common grounds that you can find on saying, well, we need to like at least come together and agree about a plan to like measure what's happening, and then know whether it is working. And maybe you think it's going to work and I think it's not going to work, but somehow we need to have a plan to test that and then make a decision on how to move forward. So I'm seeing so much negotiation and navigation of that conflict right now. And I think it's almost like it's so big, it's almost very, very difficult for people to actually start to figure out how to work with AI, because there's still a lot of people are just stuck on, the organizational cultural piece of it. I have a lot of thoughts about how people can use these tools productively for their own minds and kind of avoid some of the traps of like generating lots of stuff without comprehending it, which I do think is a real risk and is something that's much more likely to happen when you feel like you're in an environment, when you're in an environment that will only reward you for producing short-term outcomes. So one measure that I developed over the last few months that has worked really well for teams is this measure that I call overproduction pressure. Some developers are in an environment that is telling them the only thing that matters is your short-term production. Those people see AI very differently than people who are not experiencing that pressure. And so we start to measure like the beliefs and psychology around AI. We start to understand what is actually happening and why people are making very different choices with it. When I ran overproduction pressure with a real eng org a couple months ago, this measure just lit up. Like, this was so predictive of other outcomes that I have always cared about across my research. Like, the people who feel a lot of overproduction pressure, they feel like they can't talk to their boss about what's really happening. They feel like doubtful and scared about their colleagues. They are just kind of getting isolated into this little hole of being like a single lonely developer. So I suggest to the orgs that I work with, this is a great diagnostic. Like, if this lights up, this is a red flag and you cannot do your good problem solving when people are kind of feeling this hammer of overproduction all the time.
I really like that the things we're talking about, they are basically not about AI. They're just AI is just exaggerating the things that have been there all the time. And yes, it's really about the overarching goals of the team and how they structure their work and what people are expected to do. Yeah, that's true. And overproduction. Yes, I'm now thinking about examples where I have seen stuff like that, and these different perspectives can explain much more than people think. It really matters. It really matters. And, this is where software engineering is not so uniform as people perceive it is. It's much more diverse and different than people expect it to be.
That is so accurate. That is so accurate. I think that people look at software developers as a monolith, and they just sort of say, oh, they're all going to be, this is again, the brains in jars thing. You're all fungible. You're all totally interchangeable. But there's tremendous diversity in this field now. And, there's very, very different drivers of people's behavior. Something I was going to say that I think is about AI pretty concretely is like an interesting thing about context engineering and harness design, which I've done a little bit of myself, is that the mental models that you have about how work should work really can get embedded and then scaled in these harnesses and in the ways that we are shifting and prompting and trying to influence the models. And so I think this can be kind of an exhausting part of it for developers because, there's this frustration around, wow, like how come sometimes I get this amazing result and sometimes it's nonsense and all of this. Like that is genuinely happening and it's genuinely very frustrating for people. And so I think you feel kind of gaslit if all you hear is that AI is incredible, but meanwhile you are seeing times where it fails. But to me, it's the sign of a very early technology. Like we have not figured out the right infrastructure around this. And that means a couple of things. It means there's a risky thing, like if you have really bad out-of-date docs, in your org, or, your developers have access only to AI in a really constrained way and they can't give it enough context, they're actually having a very exhausting experience of like copy pasting things into the chat. It's like a very different feeling than someone who has the experience of an agent that has up-to-date context with like a lot of investment in that. So I see a psychology piece there, which is just that, again, the mental models that we have can actually now be scaled in a way that is kind of wild. When I wrote my learning opportunities skill, a friend of mine sent me a text and he said, Kat, it's like you are sitting at my shoulder and you were like forcing me to learn. So I'm a big advocate for learning and he knows I'm a huge nerd about it. He was like, when I run this, I can hear your voice. I can hear that you were the person who wrote this. So I think that's fascinating. I don't know where that's going to go, but if you're someone who's good at that, who's good at designing that, it's kind of an opportunity to actually try to share your mental model or provide like expert instructions for the people around you. And I'm seeing a lot of people start to learn to do that. So I'm really interested in how that goes.
It's a pity that mental model is not so I think it should be ubiquitous in teaching computer scientists, because thinking about metacognition, mental models is basically the skill that is being tested right now. And people who are better, at least right now at it, they navigate themselves in a safer environment, is what I experience at least. Are there any other tips or maybe your personal insights about what are the best, maybe just 2 or 3 things, the best things to take in mind talking about proper mental model of work in software engineering today?
I think that we have kind of like the things that get celebrated and we have the things that are necessary for work, but that are invisible. And so making more of those invisible things that we actually protect, is a thing that I'm very passionate about. Like we've had a long time in tech of people saying, oh, well, we'll just keep relying on open source, but we won't protect those people, or oh, there's someone who's fixing like all of the social, stuff about this team, or they're kind of doing cleanup work for someone who's an asshole, And I try to make this argument in my book that is like culture is infrastructure. It is not just a nice to have. It is really, it shapes our thinking. It shapes our problem solving. It directly changes the quality of work that we do. And so, to me, there's kind of this big overarching thing we're trying to do, which is get to a place where technology is actually for everyone. And that means technical problem solving also has to be for everyone. And, that could even be like within yourself, like just believing that you are capable of growth and change, and you are capable of skill growth, and trying to care about and center that, or it could be on the team level of saying, we have only ever valued this kind of person or created a career path that promotes this kind of skill set. But here AI came, to the world, and it could be any big technical change, but the big technological change came. And to me, we were not ready for it. We were not at all culturally ready to absorb this in a way that was going to help people. And we're now experiencing a lot of pain because of that. I think we're going to get through it. I do. I think that I have a lot of faith in the resilience of these people, and have a lot of faith in our ability to find the beneficial ways to use this technology. But I really see it as a lesson in what happens when, some of these teams, they have all the money in the world. They have incredible talent, right? And yet they are suffering. And so it's kind of a lesson in what money doesn't buy, for some of these teams.
I can relate to that. I really agree. Can I ask here another personal question? So you've touched a little bit this thing that AI is changing, AI has come and it is changing everything. And it's we don't know everything yet. And you're a public expert. You talk a lot about how things work right now. How does it feel to be public expert when there's so many unknowns? How do you?
What a compassionate question. It's scary. It feels scary. I also love it because I think I never planned to become a public expert. I tried to work out loud because I thought it was going to be useful. And I was always looking for people to connect to. I was always looking for who is my community? And I want to be part of a community of people that are trying to work on something together, And so it was almost kind of an accident. I am incredibly grateful for it. And now, I think I understand how to do it. But when I started working with developers and I released a first study, which I talk about this in the book. I had done this study by myself, basically self-funded it, and interviewed developers about their learning. And I decided to publish it, on my website because I didn't have enough money to submit it to a journal, And I just thought,
I hope part of the system.
I know. And I was like, I hope that maybe someone's going to find this useful. And then it went a little bit viral on Twitter back when I did this back in the day. And, it was that paper and that work and all of the conversation around it that, led to me eventually founding the Developer Success Lab, and so then of course I had a platform but all of these things that you might see when you look at my work now, you can trace it back to this person. And I was just sitting in a cafe working alone, kind of thinking, maybe I'll put this online, maybe someone will like it. So I try to maintain that approach because I think that, whatever platform I have, it is really not about me. It's really about the fact that there are a lot of people who need someone trying to tell their stories in public. And I think the more you get sucked into just your own stuff, that if that's just all you have, it's not going to go far enough. And so, it's tough because I want to I want to be really careful about what I say to people because I know I have some authority as a PhD in psychology, but at the same time, I want to be really open and say it's okay for us to not know everything. When I did my AI skill threat study, at the time, I will tell you, this is wild. I did not even have access to an AI license myself. And this was because I was not a software engineer, and only the software engineers were being given licenses for AI. So I was studying, how this is affecting teams, and my team and I did not even have access to these tools. So I remember talking to my partner about this. I was really stressed that I was going to get it wrong in this study. And I was trying to design the study. It was like before the study was even figured out. And she said, Kat, your job is to do what you are good at. And you are good at being a psychologist. And so I remember going back to my office and sitting down and thinking, what are the psychology questions for this moment that I really know about? And those questions ended up being about belonging and learning culture. And it turned into this big thing. It turned into this project that now like thousands of developers have used our measures from that study. I've worked with orgs to use those same measures. But it all started from a place of, what do I really know? And then what am I really uncertain about? And I think if we can take what we really, really know, those of us who are like scholars and researchers, but also be equally open to, and honest about what we really, really don't know. And we try to like put those two things together in these projects over and over again, you move things forward. So that's how I'm trying to do it. I really know things about what helps people learn. And then what is the state of truth with these models and what is the capability of the technology? I have been surprised by that over and over and over again. But I'm trying to put those two things together so that we find a path forward.
For me, it sounds like those things that you share, they're very valuable. I mean, just these truths, this stuff that may be sometimes too general, but still repeating it once again is important. And I'm happy that we have you as a public expert speaking out about these things. I really do think that it's good for the community and the software engineering teams that can learn a lot. Talking about unknowns, imagine that you are planning some big scale research right now and you have vast, enormous resources to do that. What are the most important things that you believe we need to study right now? So what would you focus on?
Oh, wow. I need a beat because that's such a great, I need to give the true answer to it. There's two domains in people. I would like to study people's use of AI, but there are two domains that I think are really, really interesting here. And one is how we think about the comprehension of technical systems with AI. And the other is how we reason and grapple with, this is going to come out of nowhere maybe for you, but how we reason and grapple with health information, because people are using AI as thinking partners about their health more than almost anything, like globally. And so there's my software developer answer, which is like, how do these teams maintain their expertise? But then there's kind of my human psychologist answer, which is like, out of all the things people are doing with AI, I'm really interested in how it can affect public health. And I've built a tool around that. And I've learned a lot of really interesting things. It's called Informed Patient. And this is another skill that I wrote. And what I learned doing that, I've sat down with a couple dozen people who have used this, and they've used it in very critical situations. I mean, like people who have cancer or very significant emergencies happening in their lives. And I know this feels like a bit of a drift from the software thing, but it's really not, because it's like we need to understand how to help people navigate information in the world and how to take advantage of the generation of these models, but also, subject it to good vetting and all of that stuff that I was talking about how expert thinking can be scaffolded in the infrastructure around these tools. I think I would do a project on that and I would pick a really important to humanity domain. And to me, some of the most important things to humanity are like, do human beings get to learn in their life? Like education and learning, it's the biggest, most successful science project we've ever done. And do people get help when they're sick? These are like two enormous human problems that I think AI is deeply involved in. And what you would learn from it would be incredibly relevant to technologists, because it could shape what we build, how we build these tools, how we understand how people use them. Yeah, I did not expect to need to come up with a research proposal in this podcast.
No, you don't need to.
That's where my heart is.
Research proposal. But if anyone is a person with these vast resources who is listening to us, please share your resources. Maybe we'll come up with a good research proposal together.
Let's do it. I will say I have something really unique with Catharsis, which is I have the trust of thousands of developers. Most people can't recruit these people to participate in research because they haven't set up the level of relationship that you need there. And there's not a lot of places you can ask these kind of interesting intersections of questions. You can't do it inside of a company. You have to have like a third space to do it so that people can feel like their data is going to something that's not just into a company. Yeah, there's an opportunity there. Catharsis is open to donation-funded research.
Personally, I would add not only health, but also mental health and the way people navigate their
big part of it.
Psychological part of their well-being with AI. Yeah, I do agree that these parts, once again, talking about environment, these are the things that shape this environment, and we're not living just in our heads solving some math problems. It's much, much more complicated than that. I think I just have a couple of last questions. So are there any one take-home message that you can share to the developers, to the researchers that are listening to us, if we're talking about today's fast changing, complicated world of AI in software? What would you like for people to keep in mind after this conversation?
I think that, it is really easy to get swept away on the speed and the constant change. And I think that people should not underestimate how far and how much influence you can have, how much good change you can actually create by thinking about some piece that you know really well and trying to contribute that. And it follows from the last conversation you and I were just having, but in the last chapter of my book, it's called Fighting Dirty for Good Culture. And I try to make the case that even in a very overwhelming technical world, even in huge companies, even when you're just one person, trying to make positive change in your community actually benefits you. Like, it's worth doing even when you fail. And it's worth doing for a lot of really interesting reasons. Like, it helps your mind. You just talked about mental health. It significantly benefits mental health. It gives you a sense that your actions matter in the world. And we actually deeply crave that as human beings. We really want to know that we are doing things that lead to outcomes in the world. So I think it can be easy to be very, very cynical in tech and to sort of say, oh, everyone around me is stupid and nothing's going to work and every system's broken but to me, every day really, really is a new next day. And I think a lot of people out there might need to hear that their actions do in fact matter. And I end the book with that message because I have constantly lived my life seeing that other people have built tools that I use. Other people did all of these things that allow me to be a psychologist now. I could not make the computer that I'm talking to you on. I could not make my phone. I couldn't invent everything about the internet. I mean, the internet is the reason that I could have a career, in this thing, and that I even could figure out how to go to grad school, right? And when someone invented all of the different pieces of technology that led to that, they couldn't have known, what was going to happen. And so you have to think about those people and think about, at some point, they must have felt like giving up, and they must have felt like there's this no point and this is so hard, and it's so useless. And eventually, they didn't though. And that thing just led to something bigger and better than they ever could have imagined. So that is really my view of the world, that like none of us are ever going to see the impact of all of our actions. So please take away just the message that I believe in you and I don't want you to give up, and I can't wait to see what you build.
This is a very powerful message. I think this is the best place to end this conversation. I really, really, really feel grateful for this conversation, for these messages, for these truths that I believe are real important, everyday life important. It's not like it's not that we're talking about some nerdy research stuff. I believe it's much more widely important than I expected from this conversation, and I'm really glad that we're here right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Just wonderful to have this space with you. Yeah. Again, some of the best questions I think I've ever been asked on a podcast. So I look forward to your next episodes.
Thank you.